Hello and welcome to Clubhouse Live, a virtual gathering of the climbing community where we can learn something new and find inspiration from the comfort of our own homes. I'm Caroline Gleich. I'm a professional ski mountaineer and activist. My pronouns are she, her, and hers. And I'm coming at you live from my home office here, work from home setup in Park City, Utah, on native land of the Eastern Shoshone, Ute, and Goshute tribes. And I wanted to mention 100% of the donations from tonight's event will go to support the important work of Latino Outdoors and the Rural Utah Project. And so to give, just click the link that's just dropped in the comment field or text UNITING, UNITING, to 44321 to give. And right now we are in these incredibly crazy, unprecedented times, and we're in our homes, we're watching the news. Some of us have taken to the streets to join Black Lives Matter protesters, and we're seeing this systemic injustice and inequality with racial issues, and we're seeing these unprecedented threats to our planet, and we're seeing these systems, this systemic inequality that is both poisoning people and polluting our planet. And it's a hard time for sure with the pandemic, but I know people really want to do more. And right now with this difficult time, there are huge possibilities for change and to reimagine our future. And one of the things that I love about the climbing community is that we don't shrink away from a big challenge. We embrace it. And right now, the most important thing we can do is vote, to register others to vote, and to fight against systemic voter suppression. So tonight, we're going to be talking about all of that. And the American Alpine Club has a goal to get every climber out to vote in 2020 through our Send It to the Polls campaign. We aim to get 20,000 climbers committed to voting, registering others, and showing up to the polls in November. It's a really exciting campaign. So before we get started on this great panel tonight, I'd like to ask you to pull out your smartphones and text send to polls to 52886. Again, that's send to polls with the number 2 to 52886 to make a commitment to vote today. Join us and be a climate voter. When you do so, you'll get automatic access to resources to connect you to your voter registration information, who's going to be on your ballot, and where your polling place is. And you'll get reminders to ensure that you show up to the polls in November. So to get started, I would like to talk about our panelists. We are going to be hearing from folks from the Rural Utah Project and from Latino Outdoors. And to get started, I'd like to invite Christian, a Latino Outdoors staff member, storyteller, amazing activist and leader. I'd like to invite Christian to introduce himself. Christian, are you there?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
My name is Christian Lamont. Thank you for the introduction. And I am a longtime voter. I started voting when I was 18. And as I was telling you all before, in 2003, I went to a polling place and I saw the I voted sticker. And I asked the older volunteer there, I said, how can I get that sticker? And she said, you have to volunteer. That is not true. You don't have to volunteer to get the sticker, you have to vote. But I took the challenge, I accepted it, and I volunteered to work as a poll worker. And I have volunteered in every election, local, state, and federal since then. And I'm very involved in getting out the vote campaigns through social media with Voto Latino. I've worked with Go Vote, which was an art campaign to get out the vote. And with Latino Outdoors, we also have a campaign called Yo Cuento 2020, which is about getting out the vote. Madeline?
Yeah, hi. So thanks, Christian, for introducing yourself. And hello, everyone. My name's Madeline. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And I just wanted to start off by acknowledging that I'm here in Salt Lake City on the ancestral lands of the Ute, Eastern Shoshone, and Goshute. Oh, and I can start my video. Hello. But I got my start in politics, much like Christian. I was young, I was in college, I was trying to figure out what it is that I was passionate about, and I started volunteering for a local campaign. And it wasn't just that the campaign kind of swept me up in its importance and that it was working on issues that were important to me, but also that it was a space for community and that it was a space for me to ask questions and to figure out where that I stood on issues that were important. And I'm eager to talk to all of you tonight and to Christian and our also co-panelist Janelle about how voting is important this year more than ever. But Janelle, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, everyone. My name is Yaneli. I also go by Janelle. My pronouns are she, her, and ella in Espanol. I'm coming at you from Denver, Colorado, which is Ute, Cheyenne, and Arapaho ancestral lands. And I am a photographer. I'm a child welfare social worker, social justice advocate. I am also a chapter outings leader for Latino Outdoors here in Denver. And I'm also a 2020 Next Gen Trail Leader for the American Hiking Society. I have worked with the Denver Elections Division just to help the bilingual voters get out there and feel comfortable enough to come to the polls. I have been voting since I was 18 as well, and I'm voting and just informing others about how they can be better educated voters is something that I'm truly passionate about. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your introductions, and I'm so excited to hear more from you tonight. Christian, can you tell us a little bit more about what Latino Outdoors does?
Yes, so I want to jump in, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that I am right now currently on occupied and stolen Tongva land here in Los Angeles. And I think that's important to acknowledge always. So Latino Outdoors, our mission statement, our vision is very, very straightforward. We inspire, connect, and engage Latino communities in the outdoors and embrace cultura y familia as part of the outdoor narrative, ensuring our history, heritage, and leadership are valued and represented. But it goes one step further. We cannot do what we do alone. It takes members of every community coming in, joining us, being a part of each other's lives, being a part of each other's community. And then we have to examine, what does going outdoors mean? And to a lot of different people, going outdoors means a lot of different things. A lot of people live in cities where it's not easy to get outside. It's not easy to get to the trails. So we encourage people to rethink what going outdoors is, rethink outside. And so through that, we also focus on storytelling, lifting up voices that haven't always been represented so that more people can see themselves on the trails, in the mountains, on a summit. So it's a little bit of the short version of what we do.
Awesome. That's great to hear about your work. And thank you so much for your leadership in making sure that the outdoors and the mountains are for everyone and that everyone is represented. And I think it's also really cool that you provide this invitation to participate, because I just think, like, when we look at who we're out with, there's so much more we could do to invite people in. And so thank you so much for your work and your leadership with Latino Outdoors. And Madeline, can you explain to us a little bit more about the Rural Utah Project?
Yeah, happy to. So hey everyone, Madeline with the Rural Utah Project. And we are, quite as our title sounds, we are doing work in rural Utah. And I think the reason that's important for today's conversation is just that as the climbing community, we do work in the areas where we recreate, right? So where we climb, where we want to visit. And a lot of those spaces are both rural areas as well as indigenous lands. And we know two things about rural areas. The first, as we've seen from previous election cycles, there's a lot of work we need to do to reach and communicate with people that live outside of our cities. And the second is that the decisions of local governmental bodies have a disproportionate impact on our daily lives. It's not just about your education, it's not just about access, it's also a large impact on conservation, on spaces where we recreate, and unfortunately on the decisions for public land issues. So when we think about the politics that we consider the most in our daily lives, the thing that we have to acknowledge is that many of those politics are local. And it starts really right in your backyard with your elections for sheriff and county commissioner and city council. So what the Rural Utah Project is doing is that we are going into and hiring people that live in these rural areas and on the Navajo Nation. And we're trying to figure out what the barriers are between people that live in remote spaces and accessing the ballot. And the thing that we're finding is that it's not a lack of will and a lack of desire to be participating in the electoral process. It's in fact the voter suppression and obstinate, systemic and systematic barriers that are between people and casting their ballot. A really good example of this is, I do not represent this work, but we have an incredible team of Native American women that work on Navajo Nation that registered thousands of voters in San Juan County, Utah, which is the home of Bears Ears National Monument in 2018, and found that one of the reasons that many people are not voting on the Utah and Arizona and New Mexico portions of Navajo Nation is that many people lack traditional street addresses. And this, you may have a way of describing your sense of place, but when it comes to filling out your US voter registration form, it becomes close to impossible, and you are often assigned to vote in the wrong precinct. So now that same team of women who started registering voters in 2018 are going door to door and are helping assign addresses to homes so that people can call 911, can register to vote, can start a small business, and access some of these basic emergency services that we all take for granted. So I just would ask, for the purposes of this conversation, when we assume what it is that's keeping people from voting, that we recognize that a lot of those things are barriers that we have put in place. And that it's up to all of us to acknowledge and to work together to lift those barriers. And I'm super excited to talk about how we can integrate this into the climbing and recreation community, because we're a huge part of it.
Well, thank you both for your leadership and hard work. So the first question I wanted to pose to everybody is, how do you engage or interact with the climbing community? Are you yourself a climber, and are members of your organization climbers? And do you hope to engage more climbers?
I could go first. So I am a climber. I am a very active member in my local Brown Girls Climb chapter here in Denver. You know, it's a great organization that helps uplift anyone who identifies as a woman, a BIPOC woman in the climbing outdoor spaces. So yes, very much a climber. Was there a second part to that question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I was one. Are members of your organization, Latino Outdoors, are they climbers? And do you hope to engage more climbers?
Yeah.
Yes. There was like 4 questions.
Sorry. Yeah, we have a huge, pretty substantial size Latino Outdoors chapter out here, and many of which who are also climbers as well. And then nationwide, just a bunch of climbers, because it's a really great sport, and it's a very uplifting sport for our community. And yeah, we just love help. Like, I seriously, when I meet a new Latinx person, I'm like, hey, have you heard of climbing? Let's go climbing. It's a great sport, and it's a really great way to uplift our community.
That's so cool. Madeline, do you want to add, do you want to talk about your interaction with climbers from the Rural Utah Project?
Totally. Yeah. This might come as a surprise to some folks, but so we have a staff that lives almost exclusively in Southern Utah. and some of the best climbing destinations in the world. And I think I'm the only person on our staff that actually climbs. Right? I know, we're a bunch of campaign junkies. So for most of the year, we live in bunkers underground with no windows and sometimes emerge close to the election cycle. That's a joke, of course, but I have come into the climbing community in the last year and a half and have found it to be both welcoming, but also in terms of like the political side of this, for those of you that think that there are high barriers to entry for politics and organizing, I would love for you to teach my staff how to lead climb, and then we can talk about how much knowledge you all hold and how difficult this space is for people to navigate. And as we work to open up these spaces where people are learning these new skills and learning how to climb, we have to do the same thing with our political system. Because it's a lot to learn.
Yeah, when I was first getting into alpine climbing and trad climbing, I joined the American Alpine Club and signed up for their Kragen Classic and learned about multi-pitch, transitions, and efficiency. But it's crazy because I've climbed some mountains, like I climbed Everest last year, but sometimes I still don't consider myself like a core climber because people are so good at climbing now. And I would definitely, just sport climbing in general is really hard. I've got all the leg strength, but none of the finger strength. So Christian, did you have anything to add about Latino Outdoors and your engagement with the climbing community?
Sure. I would like to vouch for what Janelle said, that she invites everybody to go on a climb. That's actually our first conversation. Hi, my name is Christian. Would you like to go climbing? So, and that's generally how the climbing community within Latino Outdoors behaves. They want to assume that you're up for the challenge. If you've already done it, great. If you've never done it, let me teach you how. And we've also done, as an organization, we've participated with the Live Your Dream grant, helping spread the word with that. Last year, I believe we helped answer a couple of questions and take a look through the state of climbing report, just so that was a little bit more fleshed out, and we appreciated that we're reached out to that about that. And then in Los Angeles locally, I know our team here has gone with Black Girls Trekking and some other friends to go to a local gym and again do the gentle introduction for so many people, the building of community, and that happens on the wall, that happens on the mountain, that happens on the trail, and bringing it all back, it happens when we're advocating and we're being activists and we're caring about our community and registering to vote.
Mm-hmm.
That's so cool. Well, thank you for being so inclusive, and Janelle, thank you so much for taking people climbing, because like you said, it's such a powerful way it's a great way to find that sense of power. So this is for everyone, and whoever wants to answer first can. I was going to ask, do you remember the first time you voted in a general election? Should we do the same order? Janelle, do you want to start?
I became eligible to vote the summer of 2008. So if you guys recall, 2008 was a huge year. And so, yeah, I was a freshman in college, and that was the year that it was Obama versus McCain. And it was also the first year my dad got to vote. He became a citizen that year. So it was very happy memories for me too.
I remember my first time voting, and I'll admit I remember it because it was terrifying. I was away from home and my first ballot was absentee. And I remember I was sitting on like the floor of my dorm room, like calling my mom, being like, how, but if I mail it by this date, like, will you still get it? And do I know? It was not easy. And I was studying political science at college, and I felt so ashamed that I didn't understand how to participate in this process that was supposed to be easy to me. But that was a pretty foundational experience, because I think we all go through that probably every time we cast a ballot, of this I should probably know this, but I don't. So for all of you out there, you're not alone.
Christian?
Uh, yeah, first time was also 18, and I echo that it was not exactly easy. You know, it's your first time doing it, and you think you're ready, you think you know what you have in mind, and very similarly to going out on an adventure, you have to have a plan. You know, you can't just show up and I'm here. You got to make sure, you know, you do a little bit of research. Where are you going? Know before you go, essentially. Uh, who's on the ballot? What is on the ballot? How do you feel about that? So you don't get scared, so you don't go through things too quickly, so that you take your time, you're considerate about your choices, because they will impact not only you, they will impact your family, your community, your parks, your region, the country, the world. So yeah, I showed up, you know, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, very green at the whole voting thing, and the volunteer said, "This isn't your precinct." I had no idea what that meant and why she said it in that way, but I had to drive. You know, it turned out to be about an hour, and it's little things like that I can. It's very easy for people to get discouraged, and for people to say, like, you know what, I'm good. This is a local election. I'm not gonna. I'll save it. My vote doesn't matter anyway. And I just want to remind everybody, it does. It does. It absolutely does. Your impact and your voice and your check mark, your way of counting yourself and participating, it absolutely matters.
That's a great story and a great reminder. Yeah, I remember I was so excited my first time. I wore like an American flag dress and I was all patriotic. And the top ticket items were really easy. But then once I got into the lower part of the ballot, it was a little bit more challenging. And so after that first time going to the ballot, I registered to vote by mail. So then I could sit at home with the Google search and really take more time to research those items at the bottom of the ballot that are not as straightforward, or sometimes they're worded in a confusing way. So the next question I had is, what is voter suppression and how does it show up in communities? If you have any examples, I would be really curious to hear more about that.
Christian or Madeline, would you like to start first?
Sure, I'll start us off. So voter suppression, first of all, is something that is more prevalent in our lives than we often acknowledge. It takes very little to reduce someone's likelihood of voting. There's some interesting statistics out there around how even something like increasing someone's distance from their polling location by a quarter mile can reduce their chance of voting from 2 to 5%. And when you take something like that and you put it across an electorate, it becomes pretty severe pretty quickly on how difficult it is for many people to vote. We also have to acknowledge that there are many communities in Utah and around the country that have a harder time voting than many of us, and that is not by accident. There are voter identification laws and restrictive translation and redistricting and 1,000 other ways that that governments and people and majorities have kept underrepresented voices from the table for the entire history of our country. But when we look at what's happening in Georgia and we look at what we're seeing from early elections, even now in 2020, the thing that we look at with voting, whether it be vote by mail or vote in person, is that there is no one system of voting that is equitable for everyone. And we have to acknowledge that it is a difficult process for people to engage in already. And anything we do on top of that will make it harder for everyone to have a voice in the system. And as we know, the system works best when we all participate. Some examples of what we see in the Four Corners area here in Southern Utah is that a lack of addresses, a lack of an accurate census count have kept thousands of Indigenous people that live in the Four Corners region from being able to have their voices expressed in a system that once sought to colonize their entire presence in a landscape. And the work that we do to undo that legacy of suppression is really important. And we have to listen to the communities in terms of what folks need in order to be able to get their ballot cast on the day. But yeah, voter suppression is everywhere. It's in childcare, it's in lack of transportation access, it's in lack of federal holidays for elections, it's in the way that we talk about voting, it's the way we gatekeep the political system, it's in the way we spend our money. So that's, yeah, in short, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. It's everywhere.
Yeah, Janelle or Christian, are there specific things that you've seen within the Latino outdoors community that show up?
Yeah, actually, so on the other side of the desk, and it's not always intentional, but that doesn't necessarily matter. But you know, people get worried that the levels of ID that they show, or the simple act, you know, it was a very quick conversation. This isn't your district, or this isn't your precinct, but turning away somebody at a polling place, or the lines that are so long are ways that suppression happens. And so a lot of folks in the Latino and the Latinx community, you know, they hear rumors. Oh, well, they're going to be checking for IDs. How many IDs? Well, what kind of background do you have to have? What do you need to do? Never mind, I'm going to stay at home. And it's kind of that fear of the unknown. What all do I have to present? How much of my soul do I have to expose just so that I can check off a name and an issue? And so a lot of voter suppression happens, you know, unintentionally sometimes, but as Madeline said, very intentionally, and a lot of it is based on the systems that have been set up since voting began. So.
Yeah, I would just like to piggyback off what Christian said. It's very intentional. And so just backtracking a little bit, even before a Latinx person is eligible to vote, you know, they have to be a citizen. And in this country, I pulled up some statistics today. There's approximately between 10 and 12 million undocumented people in the United States. A little less than half identify as Latinx or indigenous peoples of what is modern day Latin America. And 2/3 of those people have been living in the US for 10 years or more. And so it's not that these people don't want to become citizens, is that the road to citizenship is incredibly expensive, incredibly time consuming, and you have to know some English language, because in order to take the citizenship test, there is an English and civics test. And the only exemptions from taking those tests is that if you're 50 and older and have been in the US for at least 20 years. And then if you're 55 years or older and have been in the US at least 15 years, then you can just take it in your native language. So for example, personally, my family, I come from a long line of indigenous people from modern day Guatemala. My family has been here for a very long time, but as is typical in the story of many indigenous peoples, my family were disenfranchised people. They never went to school. And so my grandmother, who has been here in this country for at least 40 years, has never been able to become a citizen because she just doesn't even know how to read or write. So she is waiting to be able to take that verbal exam in her native language. And so even before you get to the point where you're like, where's my local poll site? What do I have to take? You have to take into consideration the fact that the government is trying to stop people from becoming citizens, because once you're a citizen, you have the right to vote. And so these 10 to 12 million people who are undocumented and wanting to become US citizens, there are so many roadblocks because if they all obtain citizenship, then we become the majority. Our voice becomes the loudest. And that's scary for them. They're shaking in their boots.
Well,
I have good goosebumps.
yeah. Yeah, that was a really powerful story. And thank you so much for sharing that with us. Yeah, it seems like it's a really, at times intentional, like you said, an intentional effort to silence people's voices. And so as a follow-up, Janelle, I was curious, how can mail-in voting reduce barriers to voter suppression in our communities?
So I have lived in Texas where there's no mail-in ballot. I've moved to Colorado about 3 years ago, and when they sent my ballot to my home, I was like, "Wow, this is amazing!" I was like, "How convenient! I don't have to like." In school, if you're being like sneaky, you're writing like answers on your arm so that you can kind of know what you're doing going into a task. It feels like a test, honestly, going to these poll sites, and sometimes if they're electronic and you have to like figure out the widgets and whatnot, having that mail-in ballot has been incredibly liberating, because I received my ballot this past week for the local elections, and I fully intend to take the whole weekend to be like, all right, what have they voted no on? What have they voted yes on? And then I have that privilege. I'm very lucky. I feel very, very lucky to have that privilege. And I think if we were to extend this nationwide, that would be incredible, especially for folks who just, I have the privilege of being college educated. Not everybody has that. So having a mail-in ballot would give them an opportunity to kind of like talk to people about it in their communities who they trust. If I was a mother who just didn't really understand, I could ask my child like, hey, what does this mean? Like, become a better informed person, just because they make it incredibly hard to read. Even as a college educated person, I'm like asking my husband, I'm like, what the heck does this mean? Sorry, but that's the sentiment. What does this mean? I went to school. I've lived here my whole life. Like, I don't know what this means. And I need like a Vox video or something to break it down for me. And if I had that time to do it at home, I could make better educated decisions without feeling rushed. Because that's another thing. When you stand at these polling sites and see how incredibly long they are, you feel a sense of urgency to hurry up because they're going to close soon, and maybe my friend down the line isn't going to get a chance, and their voice deserves to be heard too. So yeah, I mean, mail-in ballots are great. I've really loved it. I hope that we can extend that nationwide at some point.
Yeah, you make an incredibly compelling case with your story. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And for those of you who are just joining us tonight, we're talking all things voting. And I'm here with thought leaders from Latino Outdoors and the Rural Utah Project. And I just wanted to mention, while we're about halfway, that 100% of the donations from tonight will go to support the important work of these two organizations. So to give, just click on the link in the comment field or text UNITING, UNITING, to 44321 to give. And diving back into this, Madeline and Christian, I was curious, why is it important to specifically vote in local elections? Anything from the sheriff, the county commissioners, mayor, governor?
Christian, you want to start off?
Sure. So I think it's very apparent, especially we can see right now during the times of COVID, what local leadership does and what it looks like, on the very personal level. I'm very fortunate that I'm able to work from home. I have friends who are now being told like, sorry, time's up. You got to go back in, even if they're not feeling it. And it really is a matter of who did we vote in, which local leader, which city council person, which county supervisor. And beyond COVID, we also see that these are the same people making decisions about, parks and funding for parks and access to outdoor recreation areas. They also are the people who oftentimes appoint run for local offices like the sheriff. And sometimes the sheriffs overlap with law enforcement in city parks. And as we've all seen, law enforcement, is a huge issue that is sending ripples throughout the country. And it has been, again, since the founding of this country. And so to say like, oh, my vote doesn't matter, again, this whole thing, like your local election, you have the power. You can't leave it up to people like me who show up for every election. I love it. I love the power, but 13%, 20% of your neighbors should not be the ones deciding where the budget goes for the next 5 years. So that's just a little example of why it's so important to get into the weeds of who are your local representatives. You can't just wait for the big ones. You got to practice and stretch out those voting muscles every opportunity you get the chance.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to add on to what Christian is saying, with another quick story about the impact of local elections, is that for us who are involved in the space around climbing, I mean, it wasn't so long ago that the federal administration reduced the barriers of Bears Ears National Monument, which sparked a dialogue across the country around land access and recreation access, and of course, around Indigenous sacred land. But what we may not have heard so closely is that initiative, that reduction, was initiated at the local level. It was here in Utah in San Juan County, upon the insistence of local elected leaders on the county commission and elsewhere. But the thing about San Juan County, Utah, which is the southeasternmost county in Utah and home to Bears Ears National Monument, as well as the Utah portion of the Navajo Nation, is that despite having a majority of residents, people on the Navajo Nation in San Juan County have never had equal representation. And it wasn't until 2018, with a lot of voter registration effort and a lot of organizing, that for the first time in Utah's history, in the history of San Juan County, that they were able to elect an Indigenous majority to the county commission. And for those of you who may not live in county-dominated states, a county commission may sound like a what the heck is that? But with that one local election, the majority of that county commission was actually able to withdraw the county's support of the Bears Ears National Monument lawsuit, and completely changed the way that local representation approached that important land issue. When we when we give back the spaces that should be owned by the people that are being represented, is when we truly have a system that represents all of us. And as long as we're participating in systems that don't give that access, we're not really living in a democracy. And local elections, I mean, school funding, your roads, your public spaces, your public health, so much is decided by the federal administration, but even more is decided by your local electeds. Yeah, it goes a long way.
Thanks for speaking to that. So what do you see then as the biggest challenges for your community members when it comes to voting?
As I spoke before, like just knowing that there are local elections. I've met a lot of people who are like, what? I get to vote on that? What is a recording clerk? Like, I vote on that? But like everyone knows the presidential elections, everybody knows the governor elections, but the local level, just having that knowledge, not everyone is college educated. And even then, it's very confusing for folks who are at that level, and staying informed. Is just, we live in a time where it's just sensory overload, so much clickbait on our Facebook feeds, and it's hard to keep up with all the issues.
Definitely. And to speak to many folks that live and work in the recreation community, for those that may be seasonal, who may be moving often or not really tied to one space, the act of registering to vote is pretty confusing. And like, there are many of us that are like, oh, I think I'm still registered in Washington or like maybe in Alaska, but I need to update my registration now for Utah, but I need to do that by the 19th. And what party? And it's like, you could be registered in dozens of spaces. And it's also like, you may be spending a lot of time on the road and not necessarily like in one spot on election day, or you may have missed your mail-in ballot because you're on a road trip. And it's also like the people that make up these huge recreation economies in these states like Utah and different places across the Southwest in the US, like many of them face the similar struggles of figuring out how to register and where to cast their ballot that the rest of us do, but intensified. So the recreation community is actually a huge part of what demographic change looks like in some of these deeply red states. And I would encourage, if there's anyone who's watching this who is maybe seasonal, if you live, depending on your state, if you live somewhere for more than 30, 60, 30, 40 days, depending, like you are eligible to vote exactly where you are. And you don't need to have necessarily a physical address. You can register out of your van, there's lots of options for you, but don't discount yourself as a participant in something that may seem like it's not open to you.
Yeah, that's great advice for so many of those van lifers out there that are just projecting their next climbing route and, going from place to place. That's really good advice. I wanted to add, for those of you who are tuning in, if you have any questions for our panelists tonight, feel free to add them to the comments and we'll have some time at the end for a Q&A. And to follow up from the last question, knowing that there are over 7 million people participate that are climbers, whether it's in the gym or outside, how can we encourage the outdoor community, especially the young voters, the first-time voters, to join us at the polls? Kristen, do you want to kick this off?
Sure. Okay, so you're talking about how many young people, and I'm looking at the statistic from the Pew Research Center, and it's saying every 30 seconds, a young Latino in the US turns 18. That is voting power. That is a movement if we make it so. And that goes for the climbing community. That goes for the outdoor community. We are a movement. It's not just a moment, right? And so helping each other out. We do our solo climbs. We do our solo hikes, and that is good, that's important. But it's also so important to work together as a team and to have each other's back. So if your friend, if your parent, if your grandparent, if your cousin doesn't know something, be that hub of information for them. If somebody isn't sure how they're going to get to the polls, or more importantly, back from the polls because it's going to be late, see how you can help it out. You've got a community, and I know we're going through a pandemic, but it's also important to be able to, we are resourceful people. And yes, I'm talking about Latinos, but I'm also talking about climbers and the rest of the outside community. We are smart, we're clever, we know how to do research. We know how to look in advance. What's the weather going to be? What are the conditions going to be? And so use that kind of energy, funnel that towards making a plan, towards visualizing. Okay, maybe not election day because a lot of people are able to vote ahead of time, but visualize, what's your plan? Am I registered? Answer that question. Then are my friends registered? Then do I have an absentee ballot? Then when am I going to fill it out? What am I going to fill it out with? And then finally, it's time to vote. So take all that energy, all that passion, all that know-how that you exercise in the field and in the mountains and on the trails, channel that to making a plan, to visualizing what you have in front of you, and this massive amount of young people about to turn 18, all of us old folks, I'm talking about myself, and support that, uplift it, amplify it, be there, and support each other and be each other's support system. And then we can really, really make a change and then make it easier for every generation after us.
Yeah, it really just takes that one person's excitement and stoke, and it can become so contagious. And it really just takes that one flicker of inspiration and it can really spread. And I loved how you made the analogy between the skills we have as climbers, making a plan and visualizing and all of these things. That was a beautiful analogy. And so for those of you, I know that you've worked a lot in encouraging other people to register to vote. And so what are best practices for approaching individuals when registering voters? And I've been really struggling with this question right now with the pandemic, because it's not exactly like we can table at the farmer's market. And so how can we, like if each climber registered 3 other climbers or outdoor community people to vote, it could have this huge effect. So how can we do that? What are best practices with the pandemic, and what's worked for you?
Yeah, I'll start us off. I think this comes actually down to rhetoric and what messaging we use when we talk about voting with each other. And I think a lot of us carry some amount of shame in terms of our registration status and how much we know about the upcoming elections, and feeling like it's something that we should have more information on and kind of deflect conversations around. So some tactics that we use at the Rural Utah Project, instead of saying like vote by mail, for example, we soften it and we say it's vote by home, like vote at home. Instead of saying, hey, are you registered to vote, which is a yes/no question and polarizes someone into a category, we say, hey, have you updated your voter registration in the past couple of months, right? It's a more easy action for someone to take and say like, oh, you know, I haven't. And maybe they've never registered before at all, but it's an easier point of entry. And then of course, admitting that you're struggling with something. Like I'm not even joking. This is my ballot to change my registration, and it's due tomorrow and I haven't sent it yet. And I work in voter registration. And like admitting that we're all struggling a little bit with this and figuring out, saying like, hey, I'm realizing that it's COVID time and that I'm going to be receiving my ballot by mail by the first time, but I'm also 26 and I've moved 6 times in the last year. Is your address up to date? Because I don't think mine is. And making it more of a conversation are really good ways to broach that initial topic.
I definitely like your approach about making it a conversation, because I know traditionally anything to do with politics was kind of like, that's kind of rude for you to bring that up, or like, hey, like that's not for here. Can't we just stick to climbing? Can't we just stick to hiking? Can't we just stick to doing XYZ? Why does it have to be political? Why does it have to be about race? Why? And I think we've gotten to a point in history where you have to take a stand, and definitely finding your voice where you can communicate with your community, your immediate friend circle, whoever follows you on Instagram, just sharing what you know. We all have smartphones. We all have Google. We can all help one another. If I have one piece of the puzzle and you have the other, let's see what we can work out between us two so that we can both move forward. And honestly, if anybody votes for Harambe again, I will be so incredibly mad. So let's do our homework. Let's vote for actual functioning human beings this time. And let's just go forward with this intention to uplift each other instead of criticize others, people's point of views or whatnot. Let's just get everyone out there.
That's great advice. And I love how you have the conversation, and then also to frame it from a place of positivity rather from this place of guilt or shame, because I see so much environmental messaging going down that rabbit hole, and I think we can all lift each other up. So we had a question come in from Katie Bouet, and so I wanted to pose this to you. And this is something that I'm also struggling with my activism. How do we sustain ourselves and our advocacy energy until November? Because I don't know about you, but I've been exhausted. So Christian, do you want to start off?
Sure. I would say get a friend like Janelle. who reminds you to take care of your mental health. Very important.
I mentioned to him that I would beat him if he didn't.
You know, it is so important. Exactly. How do you make caring sustainable? And that is self-care is community care, right? And so you have to take into, if you're into checklists, make a check for yourself. You know, your 20 minutes, your 60 minutes, whatever it is that you need to do. If you're, you know, a very spontaneous person, make a checklist, make that time for yourself. And for different people, that's a different thing. You know, getting outside can bring that sense of peace for so many of us. And a lot of people can't get outside right now. So find something that feeds your soul, music, reading, something that you enjoy, and remember what you're fighting for. Check in on each other, check in on your friends. Perspective helps a lot. And make a plan for yourself, essentially. Yeah, keep it sustainable, like you're saying.
Yeah, I think that my daily checklist would be like eat lunch, because I always just get into this technology vortex where I forget to eat a meal or two, and then I get into that really low energy, low place in the afternoon. So I really appreciate you speaking to that. Madeline and Janelle, did you have anything to add?
Sure, I can go. I was just going to, second what Christian said about find something that is sustainable for you. I know that a lot of us like to get out there and just like send, and it's amazing and it's awesome. But right now times are difficult. So even like birding from your house, find a friend who you guys I have several friends that I've agreed that we will check in on each other every few days, if not every day. And as a woman of color, it's been very trying times right now during the Black Lives Matter movement, just because I want to be able to constantly show up for my Black kin. So it's taken a lot for me to remember, like, I need to take care of myself first, and then I can go get after it for other people who also like depend on my voice and my momentum to help them as well. And I think if we just keep it pro community instead of pro ego, that'll help us a lot. Just remember that, you got to take care of yourself because you are part of a community.
Yeah, you speak to that so well. So thank you for touching on that. How can the climbing community better show up for you and support your communities and your leadership?
Yeah, absolutely. The thing that we were talking about earlier in terms of the importance of the recreation community, and not just every election, but this election could not be understated. And it seems to me like from the conversations that we're having with friends and with neighbors and folks down south is that we're all in need of a little bit of infrastructure right now when it comes to how we hold each other accountable and how we make a plan around voting. Because we in voter registration want you to believe that it's like a beautiful, fun system and that you vote and that like butterflies come out of your ballot box, but that's not fortunately the case. And it can be a tricky system, and it requires some conversation and some consultation to figure out how you navigate it. And after we acknowledge that, us as climbers and as recreationists and people that just love to be together and also enjoy these amazing spaces, we also have a responsibility to protect them, and we have a responsibility to act for them and to advocate for them. And if we can it's even the ability to turn to your partner and be like, hey, BT Dubs, the election is in 3 weeks. It's like, how are those little steps? There's, just putting on my political hat for a second, people say that it takes 23 touches for someone to turn out to vote in a general election. You have to see 23 ads, be told 23 times, have 23 reminders. And if you can be one of those 23 reminders for someone, as opposed to a generic Facebook ad, I mean, that becomes so much more of an authentic way to turn people out for an important election. And so don't undercount the role that you have in this, and don't assume that people around you are voting or don't want to vote, because many of us are grappling with the same conversations and the same questions.
That's great advice. Yeah, Kristen and Janelle, did you want to add?
I'm sorry, Caroline. You got cut off a little bit when asking the question. I didn't hear.
Yeah, I was curious, how else can we show up for and support your communities and leadership and the great work you're doing to advocate against voter suppression?
Advocate against voter suppression?
Yeah.
I mean,
just how we can support your work and your leadership.
just do your homework when voting. Madeline did a very great job of talking about, what to do once you get there. But also before you get there, make sure you do your homework and vote for people who are promising or have shown actions to stop the cycle of voter suppression. It's very difficult sometimes to see in certain actions that running people have taken, but if you have confidence that someone is willing to make it part of their platform and create a change, I think that's very important so that future generations don't have to go through all the nonsense that's unfortunately still in place today.
We had one other question come in, if that's okay, if you have time. It's from Austin, and the question is, how can we create productive conversation with people, especially climbers, who feel disillusioned and that their vote does not matter?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question.
I'll speak up super quick. I think climbers like a challenge, and the challenge is find an issue in your life that you care about, whether that's disability rights or social justice or environmental justice or racial justice. If that's about your park or your driveway, find one issue, and I challenge you to not think about how that affects every other issue at large, how your voice wouldn't affect the larger discourse. It's easy to dismiss yourself and to say, my voice is just one. But we've seen it in the streets. We've seen it on social media. One voice, 10 voices, 5 voices here, then 1,000 watching, then 1,000 challenges, then 10,000 challenges to speak up together in unison, to challenge yourself, to make your voice matter. So I would say, like, find the thing that you care about. Vote for that. Challenge yourself to make a difference. That's the challenge right there. Care.
Yeah. I would also add on that when we look at elections, it's so often framed in winning or losing, that you may vote and you're one of a million people in an already blue state, or you voted for a candidate you wanted and that candidate lost. And so what's the point? Or maybe your candidate's not viable at all. But the two things to this, the first is that when we don't vote, it's not just that we lose, like, we don't always exist. The way that we look at who makes up this country and the way that we look at the vast trends of the US is very much based on voter turnout. And even by showing up to cast your ballot, like, you are participating in acknowledging the existence of your demographic in whatever way it might be. The other thing is that even when we lose and when an election may feel pointless, we have to take for account the narrative shifting that happens from the fight alone. Every time we run someone for local office, regardless of whether or not they're going to win, we force a narrative and we force transparency and accountability and start shifting towards a world where more candidates and different ways of being politically are possible. So I get it. It feels really weird right now. But there are a lot of people looking at it beyond whether or not something wins or loses. And hopefully we can combat some of the apathy around voting by looking at the long game.
I really like what you said about voting. Well, all of it, of course, but especially the part where you mentioned that voting forces the politicians to notice your narrative, your community. It's, you know, your vote, even win or lose, whatever it may be. It's like, hey, I'm here, I exist, I'm watching, and I will vote again. So, you know, as we have recently seen, time is such a blur now. I don't know if it was last year or whatnot, but in the senator race in Texas, you know, everyone's like, it's such a red state. There's never going to be a Democratic senator. And then Ted Cruz, who ended up winning, only won by 3 electoral votes, which was huge. So I'm not here to say blue or red, whatever it may be, that's your thing, but your vote counts. And that just amplifies the fact that young people, old people, whoever you are, we're watching, we're voting, we're going to keep an eye on things. So you better do your job, politician.
Yes, that was so powerful and a great way. And I would also just love to throw out the call to action to get more climbers and more people to run for office. Because if you feel really disillusioned, there's a great way to change it. And that is to sign up to run for your local, as a local elected official. And it would be so awesome to see more climbers, more women, more BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color running for office at the local, state, and national level. So I'm going to challenge everyone out there who's listening who might feel disillusioned to consider that. And so I wanted to give a huge shout out to our panelists, to Janelle, Christian, and Madeline from Latino Outdoors and the Rural Utah Project. And thank you so much for joining us and for sharing about your experience and for all of your leadership and hard work. I know how difficult community organizing can be, and thank you from the bottom of my heart. And for everyone who's tuned in, thank you so much for joining us in the AAC Clubhouse tonight. 100% of the donations from tonight will go to support the important work of Latino Outdoors and the Rural Utah Project. So to give, just click on the link dropped in the comment field or text UNITING, UNITING, to 44321 to give. And make sure to follow these great organizations on social media. Latino Outdoors has a great Instagram account, and Janelle has an amazing photography page on her personal account. And the Rural Utah Project is always posting great information. And so make sure to follow these orgs, follow their great work. And thank you all so much again for being here tonight.
Thanks for having us. Yeah. Thanks for making space to talk about voting and this important year.
Yeah, it was a really important conversation. So we'll keep it up and we'll keep the energy till November. We'll send it to the polls.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all. Register to vote.
Text send to polls to 52886. Get your smartphones out. Do it right now. Yeah, and everyone keep in touch. I can't wait to keep these conversations going. And if there are other questions we haven't answered, feel free to email us and we can follow up and make sure those are answered. So thanks again and have a great Thursday night. Bye.
Bye.